It is early May, 2013. Inside the Kunia Regional Saigient Operations Center, a secure facility in Hawaii. A 29-year-old infrastructure analyst sits at his terminal. His name is Edward Snowden. He's a contractor for the National Security Agency. He has a top-secret clearance, and he is in the process of extracting thousands of classified documents from the internal networks. The exfiltration is quiet. It does not look like a cyber attack. It looks like a system administrator doing his job. According to his subsequent accounts, he is methodically moving files, preparing to carry them out. The surveillance apparatus, capable of intercepting vast streams of global data, is entirely oblivious to the breach happening from within. It sees the world outside. It is blind to the terminal in its own room. To understand the magnitude of this blind spot, you must understand the architecture he was observing. The NSA had built one of the most expansive surveillance networks ever constructed. It was not a single entity, but a complex web of legal authorities and collection programs. First, there was Section 215. This was the domestic dragnet, the bulk collection of telephone metadata. They were not listening to the phone calls of ordinary Americans under this program. They were collecting the logs, millions of records showing who you called, when you called, and how long the conversation lasted. Metadata does not require a warrant to capture, but metadata reveals the pattern of a life. Then there was Section 702. This authority allowed the government to collect the actual contents of electronic communications, although the legal mandate was strictly to target non-US persons located overseas. But the scale of the collection was massive. Through a classified channel known as PRISM, the intelligence community had established legal mechanisms to request data from major American technology providers. And to make sense of this ocean of intercepted internet traffic, they utilized XKeyscore, a powerful internal search capability. Analysts could use it to query massive databases of collected data. It gave operators an extraordinary reach into the digital activities of targeted individuals. Snowden was one of those operators, a systems administrator. His job was to maintain the infrastructure. This required deep structural access. He could read the classified presentations detailing how PRISM functioned. He could see the training manuals for XKeyscore. He had documents marked top secret. Documents confirming the United States government had built systems capable of collecting communications data at a scale the public had never fully authorized. He sat there, day after day, looking at the scope of the collection. The psychological toll of this access is quiet. It is not an explosion. It is a slow, crushing realization. He saw programs that operated largely in the dark, justified by secret court interpretations, insulated from meaningful public scrutiny. He was faced with a choice. It is the same choice every insider faces when they discover a fundamental misalignment between what their organization says publicly and what it does privately. He could remain silent. He could keep his comfortable salary in Hawaii. He could continue to walk into the facility every morning, swipe his badge, and pretend he was just maintaining servers. This is the default human response. Bureaucracies rely on this compliance. They count on the instinct for self-preservation and the comfort of routine. Or he could break the oath. Breaking the oath is not a singular, dramatic moment of defiance. It is a quiet, methodical dismantling of your own future. It requires you to sit at a desk, looking at colleagues you respect, knowing you are about to betray their trust to expose the system. He knew the risks. He had studied the history of the agency. He knew what happened to those who tried to raise the alarm from within. He knew the official channels were dangerous for anyone challenging the core mission of the intelligence community. The reality of the insider threat is a vulnerability of trust. The NSA spent billions building firewalls, not deploying cryptographic defenses, and vetting personnel to keep foreign adversaries out. But those defenses are largely ineffective against a person who already has the credentials. The man trusted to build the locks. The internal audit systems at the time were fragmented. They trusted their vetting process. They trusted the background checks and the polygraphs. They believed that anyone who cleared the perimeter was loyal to the mission. It was a systemic miscalculation. an assumption that allowed a single contractor with administrative privileges to navigate the network, to query classified repositories, and to gather the evidence needed to expose the entire architecture. He was hiding in plain sight, operating under the cover of his authorized access, moving through the classified intranet. And why did he not report his concerns to his superiors? It is the first question people ask. The assumption that a functioning bureaucracy wants to correct its own overreach. But Snowden knew the history of the agency. He knew the names of the whistleblowers who came before him. Men like Thomas Drake and William Binney. They were senior figures within the NSA. They identified what they believed to be constitutional violations in the aftermath of September 11th. They chose the official channels. They reported their concerns to the Department of Defense Inspector General and to Congress. They followed the established rules for internal dissent. The response was severe. The FBI raided Thomas Drake's home. The Department of Justice indicted him under the Espionage Act. The government threatened him with decades in prison before the felony charges eventually collapsed into a minor misdemeanor. But the objective was achieved. His career was over. His finances were drained. William Binney faced a similar raid. Federal agents entered his home, pointing weapons at him while he was stepping out of the shower. Snowden looked at the Department of Justice filings. He analyzed the retaliation. The lesson was clear. The internal whistleblowing channels did not serve as a safety valve for systemic reform. They functioned as an early warning system to identify dissenters. Reporting his concerns about domestic surveillance would not stop the surveillance. It would only identify him as a threat to the programs. To expose a system of this scale, he concluded that he had to bypass its internal safeguards. He had to weaponize his authorized access. And so, he remained silent. A tactical silence. The countdown began, a span of 41 days from the moment he began moving the core archive to the day he contacted the journalists. This period is where the true weight of the decision rests. It is not an action movie sequence. It is the grueling, quiet reality of an insider threat. Every morning he drove to the Cunha facility. He walked through the security perimeter. He nodded to the guards. He sat at his terminal. He drank the office coffee. He interacted with colleagues he liked and respected. He watched them do their jobs, knowing that he was actively preparing to expose their workplace to the world. The psychological load of a double life is immense. Paranoia becomes a necessary survival skill. He isolated himself. But he did not tell his girlfriend what he was planning. He could not burden her with the knowledge, nor could he risk making her an accessory to a federal crime. He sat across from her at dinner, carrying the absolute certainty that their life together was about to end. He was abandoning his home, his relationship, and his freedom. And he could not say a single word to explain why. He began the quiet process of erasing his future. He researched secure communications. He set up encrypted channels using tools like Tails, a privacy-focused operating system, and PGP encryption. He reached out to a documentary filmmaker named Laura Poitras and a journalist named Glenn Greenwald. He used the pseudonym Cincinnatus, the Roman figure who surrendered absolute power to return to his farm. His initial emails to the journalists were cautious. He demanded they use encryption. He warned them that if they looked into his claims, they would become targets of the very surveillance apparatus he was trying to expose. He continued his shifts, consolidating the data. The United States government was spending billions to monitor anomalies in global communications, but they failed to detect the anomalies sitting in their own facility. The auditing tools did not flag his behavior. The system was designed to keep foreign hackers out, not to monitor the routine administrative tasks of an employee with high-level clearance. He was acting within the broad privileges of a systems administrator. To the internal network monitors, he simply looked like an employee doing network maintenance. The days bled into weeks. The archive was secured on physical drives, small enough to conceal in a pocket. Then he needed an exit strategy. He requested medical leave, citing a pre-existing condition with epilepsy. It was a plausible administrative reason to break his routine, to stop swiping his badge without triggering immediate investigations by human resources or security personnel. He packed a few bags. He left his home in Hawaii, knowing he would likely never see it again. On May 20th, 2013, he boarded a flight. He chose a destination with a complex political relationship with the United States, a place where the legal and diplomatic reach of American intelligence would be delayed just long enough for him to safely hand over the files to the press. Hong Kong. The contractor had left the facility. The data was in his possession, but the agency did not know he was gone. They were still collecting metadata. They were still executing Section 702 intercepts, completely unaware that their most closely guarded operational details were currently sitting on a commercial flight over the Pacific Ocean. The Mira Hotel, Hong Kong. He is sitting in a room, waiting. The journalists, Laura Poitras and Glenn Greenwald, arrive. The environment is dictated by operational security. Based on their accounts, he unplugs the hotel phones. He uses pillows to block the gap under the door. He covers his head and his laptop with a blanket to enter his passwords, a low-tech defense against potential visual surveillance. He provides them with the encrypted archive. He hands over the cryptographic keys. On June 5th, 2013, the first story is published. The Guardian releases a top-secret court order from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. It compels Verizon to provide the daily telephone routing records of millions of U.S. customers. Section 215. The domestic metadata dragnet is suddenly public knowledge. Days later, the Washington Post and the Guardian publish the PRISM slides. They detail the intelligence community's access to data from major technology providers under Section 702. Then comes the reporting on XKeyscore, outlining the powerful search capabilities used by analysts to query intercepted internet data. Shift the perspective away from the hotel room. Look at Fort Meade, Maryland, the headquarters of the National Security Agency. The impact within the intelligence community is severe. Officials are watching their classified presentations printed in international newspapers. The initial internal response involves tearing through access logs to find the source of the breach. They trace the digital footprints, the unauthorized download logs. The trail does not lead to a sophisticated foreign cyber unit. It leads directly back to a single contractor terminal at the Cunha facility in Hawaii. The realization highlights a profound systemic failure: the massive security apparatus, the biometric scanners, the extensive background investigations. All of it was bypassed by an insider with administrative privileges and a thumb drive. The United States government moves swiftly. The Department of Justice unseals a criminal complaint. They charge him with theft of government property. More significantly, they charge him with 2 counts of violating the Espionage Act of 1917. A law originally designed to prosecute foreign spies during World War I is utilized against a domestic whistleblower. They revoke his passport. Snowden attempts to fly to Latin America to seek asylum. With his travel documents canceled by the State Department while he is in the air, he lands and is immediately stranded in the transit zone of Sheremetyevo International Airport in Moscow. The man who exposed the American surveillance architecture is suddenly stripped of his ability to travel. The years pass. The geopolitical landscape shifts. He remains in Moscow. In 2020, he is granted permanent residency. In 2022, he is officially granted Russian citizenship. The reality of his situation is a stark irony. The individual who sacrificed his life in the United States to warn the public about government overreach is now living in permanent exile under a government heavily criticized for its own authoritarian control. He is caught in a permanent geopolitical standoff. But the core legacy of the event remains embedded in the wreckage of the internal security protocols. The intelligence community engineered a vast, sophisticated architecture. They built systems capable of collecting and analyzing data on a historic scale. They relied on a strict culture of compartmentalization and security clearances. They operated on the fundamental assumption that anyone who passed the vetting process would prioritize the mission and their own security above their personal conscience. They built firewalls against external cyber threats. But a bureaucracy cannot code a firewall against human morality. The most powerful intelligence agencies in the world were compromised not because of a flaw in their software. They were compromised because they fundamentally miscalculated the breaking point of an insider. That is the true, unpatchable vulnerability of any massive system. It can operate in complete secrecy, with absolute efficiency, right up until the moment a single person inside the room decides to stop being quiet.